Hi guys, welcome to chapter 12, key issue 3, the only other lecture for chapter 12, and remember you got a lot for chapter 13, I'm sorry. Okay, a lot of this stuff we've already talked about in class, but still probably want to take some notes on this. And then remember you should have your chart all ready to go for this lecture. You're going to make some check marks when I tell you to, okay? Okay, first thing, this is not in your book, so really needs to go in your notes. Draw yourselves a little pyramid. You could even put this in your map journal. I might have you do that when we come back. That would be a good idea. But this is the urban hierarchy, and it's been a while since we've talked about hierarchies, but remember that's a type of diffusion. So it starts, so basically, here, let me get my pointer ready. So, this is, it says conurbation. You can cross that out, or I mean, just write megacity. That would be a better description of that and something that we're more familiar with, right? So this is basically just showing you the megacities are at the top because they're the biggest. But remember also, when we look at pyramids, the top also means that there's less of them, right? So they're the biggest, they're the top of the hierarchy, but there's less of them. Then the next largest is the city, then a large town, a small town, a village, a hamlet, which is like a teeny tiny village, and then some isolated place, okay? So the further you go up the pyramid, it says right here, increase in the size of the settlement and the population, more services in a megacity, right, than obviously a hamlet. But isolated places are more common than your megacities, okay? I would memorize the order here. Great thing to go on a cram sheet. And yeah, there you go. Urban hierarchy. Get that in your brain. Okay, we've talked really briefly about this when we did our little illustrations last class, but your book calls them global cities. I think your test is probably going to call it a world city, just based on previous questions I've seen. It looks like they like to use that terminology. So just know, global, world city, same thing. So those are cities that are centers of economic, cultural, and political activity, strongly interconnected and in control of global systems of finance and commerce. This would be another thing, like you could put megacity / world city up here. That would also work. So that could also go to the top of the urban hierarchy. Something that all of these have in common, like London might, so London's a global city, but it might not necessarily have all of these qualities, right? But basically a world city drives globalization, right? There's something coming from that city that gets spread all over the globe, okay? And they're important oftentimes for multiple factors, but at least one of those, okay? So here is a list of world cities. There you go. You don't have to write down the list because you already have a list. It's just a little introduction. Okay, so here we go. Megacities, I'm going to go back to the list in a second. Megacities we've talked about, but just means that a city has 10 million people in it. What I haven't really talked about is just how rapidly megacities are increasing in the periphery and semi-periphery countries. So we know that those have the highest CBR, which is a big part of it, but something to keep in mind is if we go back to the urban hierarchy, the CBRs are going to be higher in these up here at the top, right, than below. Okay, so a lot of that, like huge increases we're seeing in CBRs in those types of countries are happening in the megacities, not so much the isolated places. Okay, so here are the top 10 cities in regards to population in 1950. So you might want to just like write down like the top 3 or 4. So New York was number 1 with 12.3 million, London, Tokyo, and Paris. So the 1950, this is the list. Notice only one megacity on there, which is New York. Okay? Now, look at 2015. This is the population of the top 10 cities now. So, Tokyo is now up there, Mumbai, India, Lagos, Nigeria, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So, yeah, it's definitely changed. New York City has increased its population, but it's definitely towards the bottom of the mega cities now. So, pretty crazy. But you will notice, like, aside from Japan, this is a semi-periphery area, periphery, semi-periphery. I'd probably call that semi-periphery, periphery, semi-periphery, okay? So that makes sense, right? That's where most of our population growth is happening in those mega cities. So, interesting shift. I would just write like a little note about that to yourself. Okay. So now we're going to start the checklist. So get that ready. So you can place an X or a check on each city that I'm going to name for you, okay? So our first category, you want to find it at the top there. I think these are mostly in order, is banking. So now for banking, you're going to put a check next to London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Okay? I'm going to give you a second. Make sure you're on banking. Find all of those. Okay. These are all world cities, by the way. Okay, producer services. So these, a lot of this has to do with manufacturing. So you'll have some on there that are kind of surprising. Some of them are not so surprising probably, but London, New York, Hong Kong, Paris, and Tokyo. All big for producer services. London is going to be one you're going to put quite a few checks next to. Okay, management. New York, London, Paris, Madrid, and Stockholm. Notice those are all core countries, right? So you will notice like the higher level types of positions and like higher level importance is going to be more in the core countries than the periphery and semi-periphery. Okay, law, London, New York, Frankfurt, Hong Kong, Washington, D.C. Okay, lots of lawyers in those cities. Lots of huge law firms that do international cases in those cities. Insurance, cities that specialize in insurance, London, New York, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, and Paris. You'll notice Hong Kong is popping up quite a bit as well. Advertising, New York, London, Hong Kong, Toronto, first Canadian city we got up there, and Sydney, first Australian city too, actually. Toronto is in Canada. Media, London, New York, Paris, Los Angeles, of course, and Milan. I think that's our first Italian city that we've had on here, so that's exciting for Italy. So advertising is kind of what we're talking about with media, things like that. Architecture and engineering, London, New York, Beijing, Singapore, and Shanghai, which makes sense because all of these cities have very impressive architecture. I feel like Dubai should be on there too, but maybe they're not considered a world city just yet, but they have really good architecture and engineering there too. United Nations agencies. So we know that the headquarters is in New York City, but they also have agencies kind of scattered around the world. So Geneva, Brussels, Addis Ababa, Cairo, and Bangkok, all places that have United Nations agencies. First Thai city we have at the bottom down there. National diplomatic missions, so organizations that work for diplomacy, negotiating contracts and relationships between like different countries. So Washington, D.C., of course, that makes sense. New York, London, Tokyo, and Paris. Okay. Humanitarian and environmental NGOs. NGO stands for non-governmental organizations. So these are privately funded charity organizations not set up by the government. Okay, Nairobi, which is in Kenya, Brussels, Bangkok, London, and New Delhi. Okay, so got some new ones on that one. Scientific research. These cities are leaders in scientific research. London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, Basel, Geneva, and New York. Boston is where like a lot of like MIT, Harvard, lots of upscale universities are there, so that makes sense. Okay, and that's the list. So now what you need to do is find the top 3, and you're going to highlight those and rank them 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 1 should be the one that had the most checks out of all those cities. Okay, and this is really, really important. World cities are not simply the world's largest cities. They are control centers for the global economy. They are important for many countries all over the world. They're centers of global importance. That's why they're called world cities, because the entire world is connected to them in some way. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily hugely populated cities. Most of those on the list do have large populations, but not all of them do. So world cities, it has much more to do with their importance than their size. Because like most of those, I don't think are mega cities. So those are not the same thing. Okay? Alrighty. What are some problems with world cities and mega cities then? So, lots of wealth inequality. So world cities especially have a lot of wealth, but it doesn't mean that there's a lot of rich people there. There's a large proportion of rich people, but they also tend to have big problems with homelessness, lack of affordable housing for those lower income persons that we're going to talk about too a little bit next chapter. So that's a big problem. Political, environmental problems also usually come with large populations. Pollution, political corruption, basically politicians with too much power is pretty common in these locations. Lots of pressure on resources because of increasing populations. Sorry, I have the hiccups. LaCroix gives me hiccups. Okay. Oh, look at that. We're already done. Oh, it was a quick one. Okay, well, I will see you guys back here for chapter 13. As I said, there will be a lecture for every section for chapter 13. And they're kind of lengthy. I'm going to try and keep them under 15 minutes for you, but I might have to talk fast, so you might want to slow me down a little bit. Okay, I'm hoping you're having a nice spring break. I certainly am. I'm a little worried that my dogs have been so quiet. I'm going to go make sure they're still alive.